science fans. Welcome to Live Science. I'm your host, Judy Stroh. Today I have with me my most favorite co-host at all. Don't tell your coworkers, Mindy Weisberger, senior writer at Live Science.
You say that to everyone, don't you?
Listen, if somebody else would do a live with me, I would say it to them. So this is just
fair enough
to do it more. So Mindy, today you have enticed me with a beautiful subject of intoxication of animals.
Oh, yes. Well, of course, the holiday season's coming up. So even though things are probably going to be a little scaled back this year because we're all still dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, there will likely be a little bit of the usual revelry, which, can sometimes include maybe a few too many glasses of wine or one too many cocktails. But humans indulging in alcohol and other intoxicating substances, that didn't start in modern times, the modern office party. This is an experience that has very deep roots in our evolutionary past. And in fact, humans are not the only animals that dabble in intoxication. So Judy, you have a cat, right?
Yes.
You Yep. So you may have noticed firsthand how your cat responds to catnip.
Oh my God, he loves it every single time. He just smashes his face against the jar and rolls on his belly, and he's never like that otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, our cat's the same way, and then of course every so often there's like a news story about elephants getting drunk on palm wine, or deer getting drunk on fermented fruit. But this behavior is actually a lot more widespread in animals than you might think. And studies of how intoxicating substances affect animals have actually helped scientists to understand these compounds and to understand how brains and bodies process things that might make us, a little loopy. And with us today to talk about that is author Oné Pagán, who is a professor of biology at Westchester University in Pennsylvania, and author of the new book, Drunk Flies and Stoned Dolphins, A Trip Through the World of Animal Intoxication. So, Dr. Pagán, thank you so much for being here.
Welcome. Thank you for having thank you for having me on. And please call me Oné. The title is for the students and the coworkers, and some of them at least.
Okay, Oné it is. Okay, so before we get started, for everyone who's watching, if you have a question, you can drop it in the comments. We will try to get to as many as we can in just a little while. So Oné, what is it that first interested you in the subject of intoxicated animals?
Well, it was an unintended consequence of my own research. I've been on this book writing adventure since 2012 or something like that. But specifically in my lab, I'm a pharmacologist by training, and my chosen animal model are planarians. Those are the freshwater. I work with the freshwater types. Those are the little worms that you can cut their heads off and they will regrow their heads or virtually any body part, including their brains. My own research, and by the way, I want to give a big shout out to the Pagán lab, all my students who are the ones that make this happen. So hello guys, I'm here. And we work with usually abused substances. For example, you can give the worms nicotine, for instance, and you let them swim in nicotine for a while. You take the nicotine away, they go crazy. They start swimming like crazy. They go like corkscrewing. They start going like a cobra, looking around, just pretty much like a person addicted to alcohol. And we work with some other addictive substances, alcohol, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, let's talk for a minute about what it actually means to be intoxicated. So what makes a compound capable of producing either an addictive or an inebriating effect, and how does it interact with the body to accomplish that?
Oh, well, it's just everything is through the nervous system. Okay, so that's the main thing. Intoxication is a rather subjective effect because, for example, I can get dizzy with a beer. Okay, that's my thing. Some people need more than a beer to get dizzy. Okay, so it's very widespread, the actual response. Any substance that can potentially change the behavior of an organism in a way that impairs its normal functioning, I would define that as intoxication.
Okay, now, and this isn't a recent discovery. Humans have not recently found out that this was something that they could do. This is something that actually goes back thousands of years and actually is part of our evolutionary past. So when did humans figure out that some types of plants or some types of fungi would provide a more interesting result than just filling our stomachs?
Okay, so we don't know exactly the very first person who actually, figured that out, because it surely was. It's surely been around for thousands of years. For example, you can go to archaeological digs and you can find like ancient pieces of pottery, and by analyzing the chemical residue, you can tell, well, they were brewing beer or they were making wine. Okay, we're talking about 6, 7, maybe 10,000 years ago. My biased opinion is that probably, I don't know, 50,000 years ago, an early ancestor was really, really hungry. The only thing around was some fermented barley or something like that. He tasted it. Oh, it's bitter, but I'm hungry anyway. So he ate it. And after a while, well, he or she, who knows, started feeling a warm sensation of, well, I like the way I feel by eating this type of thing. And as they say, the rest is history.
Right, but it's not just part of human history, because
Oh, not at all.
right, people might think that mind altering substances is something, looking for them is uniquely human behavior. But in your book, you mentioned quite a few examples of other animals that use compounds this way, and we've actually written about a number of them at Live Science. One of them, for example, is the wild chimpanzees in Guinea, who would get drunk by sipping fermented palm wine, and they would actually crumple up leaves and use them as like sponges to kind of soak up the fermented sap and then squeeze it into their mouths. And chimps are our closest relatives, so it's probably not surprising to see that chimps or other primates, like the ones in like the monkeys in this video here, share our affinity for alcohol. But how widespread is this across the tree of life?
Well, the thing about it is that you wouldn't expect like an invertebrate to be able to get drunk. And well, it's not a spoiler alert. Fruit flies can get drunk, and even planarians, like the things that we can do. Even male fruit flies, for instance, when they fail to get female companionship, okay, they prefer fermented fruit rather than fresh fruit. Okay, so that parallels the human nature. Okay, so and that goes to the similarity on the receptors, nerve pathways in their nervous system.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so essentially, when they can't find a mate, they drown their sorrows in alcohol.
Pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much.
Okay, and it's maybe a little understandable. So, but one of the examples that you had in your book that I just loved was, which I'd never heard of before, was the one about koalas. So you mentioned a letter that was received by Charles Darwin, who of course is the 19th century naturalist who introduced the world to the theory of evolution by way of natural selection. And one of his colleagues wrote to Darwin and mentioned 3 koalas in Queensland who had, and I'm quoting, an inordinate love of tobacco and rum. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, trust me, I was as surprised as you are when I started researching the subject, and I learned about koalas. We would think about koalas, about this cuddly little peaceful Winnie the Pooh. Can I say Winnie the Pooh? Sorry, type of thing. Okay, but then in that letter, they described the person described to Darwin how the koala will like tug on the sleeve of the owner. Okay, because he wanted wine. Okay, and not only tobacco as in smoking, the koalas will steal their pipe. Okay, and then they will chew on the residue of the tobacco in the pipe, and they would get, well, for all intents and purposes, addicted to it.
Right. No, I remember reading in the letter that the koala would hold the pipe and would lick it, and it seemed like it started with the smell, though, that they would smell the smoke and that would attract them to it, and then they would get the pipe and just be like,
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So, but let's talk a little bit about this type of behavior in animals, because how do scientists know if animals are becoming intoxicated by choice? Like you mentioned the example of, maybe like the first human that, perhaps just picked up a piece of fruit that maybe was a little past its prime, and because they were hungry, they ate it and something happened to them. So, if a person brews a cup of coffee in the morning today, it's usually because they know what's going to happen next. They know that it's going to affect them in a certain way, and they want that to happen. Is that true about animals, or is intoxication just a sort of an accidental byproduct that they don't expect?
Well, yes and yes. Because some of the hypotheses that people have actually proposed begin just like that. Because of hunger, an organism will eat something, all right, and then the psychoactive effects will kick in, and they get used to it, and then they will eventually seek it out. For example, legend says that people discovered coffee because of an Ethiopian goat herder. He noticed that his goats will go and nibble on certain plants and certain berries, and then the goats will become jittery and whatever jumping around. So, and that, lo and behold, coffee came to our society. But then there's certain animals, going back to Australia and regions like that. Wallabies, probably I'm going to say some zoological heresy right now, but wallabies are kind of tiny, cute kangaroos. Okay. And there's been documentation that they actually raid poppy plantations. Okay.
Hmm.
Despite having plenty of food elsewhere, they go, raid the plantation, they eat the poppy seeds and whatnot, and then the farmers find them all slumped around the poppy seeds and whatever. So maybe it began with hunger, but then it continued as pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
That's again, it's very hard to figure it out. That's what it makes it interesting, I guess.
Yeah, no, this is something that, as you mentioned, this is something that that's been observed in different kinds of animals. This can be especially dangerous for birds, who run the risk of it, because this happens to birds too. And then, and then of course there's the risk of flying under the influence, which can be
Yep.
Dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. Because one thing is that if you see like a flock of birds, I love this flock of birds that they fly in unison like a single organism. Okay, they are only able to do that through very high coordination. And I suppose that in a normal flock, they will bump into each other from time to time. But to confuse that with a big building and crash onto it, well, you need to be intoxicated for that. Yeah.
Right. So, well, there's another animal that has kind of a reputation for getting drunk. That's probably not true, and that's elephants. So of course, anyone who's a fan of classic Disney probably remembers the March of the Pink Elephants from Dumbo, where there's this beautiful trippy sequence of where Dumbo gets a little drunk accidentally on champagne and a bucket of water, and just hallucinates, and you see all of these elephants, all these elephants behaving very, very drunkenly, and this is something that it seems like there's been a lot of anecdotal, there've been a lot of stories about elephants getting drunk, and in fact, even last year there was a story that went viral after a photo was very widely circulated that showed a couple of elephants that had allegedly gotten drunk on palm wine at a village in China and then fallen asleep in a garden. And people loved the idea of drunk elephants. It turned out later, of course, that this was not the case, and there was actually no evidence that the elephants had drunk anything. But I wrote about that for Live Science, and as I was doing it, I actually learned that this idea of drunk elephants is something that scientists have been debunking for probably about a decade. So could you maybe talk a little bit about like, why would it be hard for elephants to get drunk?
We are assuming that elephants have more or less the same type of nervous system as we do in terms of pharmacology, meaning that they will be as sensitive to alcohol as we are. And the weight of the elephant, the size of the elephant, if that's true, must play a role. Can you imagine how much fermented fruit does a bull elephant has to eat to get drunk? So that's one thing. But don't get me wrong, elephants can get drunk. And there's been scientists who actually have done experiments. They drive like a Jeep with a drum full of liquid laced with alcohol. They feed it to elephants on purpose. There's documentation for that. Okay. What's more dangerous than an aggressive bull elephant? A drunk, aggressive bull elephant. Okay, so that takes courage. Right. So they can get drunk, but probably the marula tree story is kind of, it's an anecdote. I mean, potentially true, but not very reliable in nature.
Right. The marula tree that's a tree that produces these fruits that supposedly, when they ferment, they produce a high amount of alcohol. And if the story is that if elephants ate enough of these, then that would make them drunk. But it seems like that's probably not how it was happening.
Yeah.
But anytime we talk about animal biology for anything, not just for whether or not animals get inebriated, you have to acknowledge the role of evolution in shaping all of the features and the biology that animals have. And features typically evolve in some way because they contribute to an animal's ability to survive as a species. And intoxication, even if it's pleasurable, seems like it's something that would always be more of a hindrance than a help. So from an evolutionary standpoint, is there any benefit to this?
Well, the first one is nutritional, because there's one of the main hypotheses that deals, for example, with alcohol, is the drunken monkey hypothesis. That actually explicitly states that intoxication, at least this intoxication behavior in monkeys, began with a nutritional background. Okay, meaning that they were hungry, they would get fruit. What's the easiest fruit to get? The one in the ground. The fruit in the ground, it's probably fermented if it's been there for a while. Okay, so that one thing leads to another. They get drunk. Another related theory is the stoned ape hypothesis, in which it's a little less formal than the stone monkey hypothesis, but they essentially state pretty much the same thing, that ancient humans, for example, or even monkeys or chimpanzees, they began eating like fungi or mushrooms, organisms like that, and many of those are intoxicating. Then again, many of those are actually toxic. Okay, can you imagine the very first person? I mean, how many people or how many animals die before the other ones say, well, don't eat that one. You see, don't eat that fruit or don't eat that mushroom.
Right.
You know, but yeah,
that's something that we also, we can also look at human experience with experimenting with different kinds of intoxicating substances, because obviously sometimes a small amount of something might be pleasurable or might cause a reaction that is enjoyable, but too much of it will not.
Absolutely, and that's true from a pharmacological standpoint, true of everything, coffee, water, even.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. So, and then there's another example that you mentioned in your book that I wanted to touch on. This actually, it's actually part of the title, the stoned dolphins part. So this is another great example of animals that are widely considered to be highly intelligent mammals, doing something that seems like they are actively pursuing. They're performing a behavior, and it seems like they're actively pursuing the end, which is, in this case, intoxication. And in this case, it has to do with pufferfish. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably also an anecdote at this point, but it's been observed. Okay, the behavior has been observed. The motivation for the behavior is what's in question. So the thing about it is that some time ago, a group of underwater filmmakers were, taping a pod of dolphins underwater. And they noticed that they were passing to each other a pufferfish, but they didn't kill the pufferfish. They just nibble on it and they will pass it around. And they interpreted that for all intents and purposes, they look intoxicated. They were like, I don't know, looking at their image in the mirror very intently. I've read that some like swim, I don't know, upside down, things like that. The thing about it is that pufferfish is best known for secreting a specific type of toxin called tetrodotoxin, which is a nasty toxin. Right? That's, I mean, humans ingest a large amount of tetrodotoxin, they will die, period. Okay? And that said, it's one of the main ingredients in Japanese traditional culture, fugu. Okay?
Right.
So to be certified as a fugu chef, you need to study hard and be very adept at dissecting the fish in a very appropriate way, because what people say they feel is that this tingling sensation in their lips, pretty much like the tingling sensation that you begin to feel at the dentist, because it's interacting with exactly the same type of nerve channels, okay, the tetrodotoxin.
Okay.
And it can also cause psychoactive effects in humans. We don't know what happens to dolphins. It's not far-fetched to hypothesize that they can get psychoactive effects by virtue of being much bigger animals than humans, and that whatever will kill one of us will intoxicate a dolphin. But we don't know yet. I haven't seen any actual studies that study that.
Okay. For those of you that are just joining us, we are talking to Oné Pagán about his new book, Drunk Flies and Stoned Dolphins. Judy, do we have any questions that are coming in?
Not a lot. There's some people that are definitely in the realm of this. Jeanette on YouTube is they're also their version of intoxication, which whatever you need to do to get along.
Hello, Jeanette.
Welcome, Jeanette. Thanks for watching and doing your nicotine while you watch.
Sure.
We do have a question from our own Diana Whitcroft. Because I'm also curious about this, about hangovers. It's the reason I can't drink anymore is because my hangovers were awful. So,
well, the answer is yes. In the same documentation that Darwin narrated, he actually said something in the lines of, afterwards, the monkeys look miserable and they learned from experience, which is much better than many humans do. That's what Darwin said. Okay, so yeah, so, some of us, yeah.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions?
We do, from a Michael on Facebook. I'm not trying to say an elephant may have eaten all the fruit and is distilling it in its stomach as we speak. Why am I doing this? Maybe this is not a question.
I'm not sure there's a question in there.
When we're eating fruit, is it distilling in our stomach? I don't know if that's how.
Well,
that's actually an interesting question. Can you get drunker after you've as something is being digested?
Some people can. Actually, there's a syndrome that it's called the auto brewery syndrome. Okay, some people, I mean, it's been studied right now in the scientific literature. Some people, usually due to infections of certain kind of yeasts in their bodies, they will produce alcohol in their bodies without actually drinking. That's one thing. And if that's true, and if that's completely well demonstrated, it's not that out of the question that a person can actually ferment fruit in their own digestive system. Of course, it's going to be like pH considerations, stuff like that. But I wouldn't say that's impossible.
Well, that's good to know. We have a theory from a watcher on Facebook that some drawings made in caves are by humans under the effects of psychotropic substances. Other thing, I asked myself if a plant can suffer for chemical substances. Animals eating substances feel pleasure but have fun. Makes it easier to find a girl and make sex. Yes, it does. These substances will relax us and give us.
Well, you mentioned alcohol as being something comforting for fruit flies that can't find a mate.
Yes. Yeah. And about plants, I like the part about plants in the question, because one main question is, why would I don't know, a poppy plant make morphine or all these type of substances? Why would a coca plant make cocaine? They don't use it in their own physiology at all. So the current understanding of this is that these chemicals were intended by the plant as insecticides first, okay? Because many of these substances are actually toxic to insects and organisms like that. You can also hear that if you take, for example, coffee grounds and you spread them around your plants, that gets rid of pests and animals like that. So that's pharmacological warfare. But the thing about it is that with time, since the plants that survive better because of the chemical, that created a selective pressure for plants that actually synthesize those chemicals. And then it became like a symbiotic relationship between animals and plants, and eventually about humans and plants. For example, cannabis plants. It's been well documented that the potency in terms of amount and pharmacological effects of the cannabis, we're talking marijuana here, it's way stronger now than it was like 50 years ago. And that's hypothesized to be by a selection by humans, because they will, people who farm, I don't know if that's the right word, farm this type of plants, they will select the plants that gets a bigger kick for the buck. Okay, and eventually the plants that survive in that context would be the ones with a higher chemical content or more potent chemical content. Okay, so evolution is involved in all of these type of things.
Right, evolution, and in this particular case, artificial selection, where you have humans that are selecting specific plants because of the potency of certain chemicals.
Absolutely, I'm geeking out big time. Thank you for being. I've been trying to contain myself, but what you see is what you get, and I'm going all fanboy because I'm on life science. And you gave me the credibility. I told you that before we started. You gave me street cred with my kids, so thank you.
That's all we want to hear.
I mean, we had our one of our writers, Nicoletta, comment that we've actually covered the outer brewery syndrome that you talked about earlier.
Yeah,
so we're all
great minds.
We're all in the know here.
Right, and one of our other writers also wrote about I think it was traces of cannabis that were found in an archaeological site in Israel, I believe. So in the remains of a clay vessel, there was evidence that we don't know what it was being used for. It may have been used in a ritual.
Well, actually, cannabis oil was used for anointing people in religious rituals.
Okay.
Yeah.
The original tinctures. We've had some people asking about common pets, like how can like your cat and dog get high? And then we have a question here from Rebecca. Has there been studies on cats and catnip? So if you guys want to elaborate more on catnip, I know we've covered it a few times.
Yeah, and I have a wonderful story for you. We don't have grandkids yet, but we have grandcats. Okay, our daughter, she has 2 cats, and it's interesting because they're actually pictured. She sent me a picture, and they are in the book, because it's an illustration of how the same substance can affect differently to individuals. For example, she has two cats, the male, Elune, and Elara, the female. When she gives like catnip laced toys to her cats, the male, Elune, gets like the prototypical, stereotypical high. He starts looking at the ceiling like, meow, meow, something like that. For Elara, it's as if she's been chased by a monster that nobody can see. She starts running through Vanessa's my daughter, apartment, running like crazy. So the same chemical in the same species. Okay, so it's like the technical term is pharmacogenetics, because the genetic and I'm geeking out again. The genetic endowment in an organism, influences how we deal with drugs. Okay, so it's a very interesting example. So yeah, pets can get high. Yeah, short answer, yes.
Yeah, no, we love geeking out at Live Science, and actually it's interesting because one of the things that scientists are studying about catnip, obviously there's the impact it has on cats, which I think people are very familiar with, but catnip is something that scientists are also looking into as a type of mosquito repellent, because the chemicals that the cats respond to actually seem to repel insects.
Yep. Yeah, I've read about that too. There's many, lines of research that deal with that. Especially, again, probably the most dangerous animal on Earth is the mosquito. Okay, in terms of how many people die because of them, and there's a lot of research in that sense. And yes, there's many repellents, naturally occurring repellents that can be potentially used. But before we leave catnip, okay, not only domestic cats can get high. We're talking big cats, tigers, jaguars, and whatnot. And there's an anecdotal tale in one of the books that I researched that apparently a young tiger smelled catnip. It jumped like high in the air, did like a twirl on the air, urinated all over, okay, and then fell.
I'm really glad that that's not how my cat responds to catnip.
Yeah, so I'm telling you what I read.
Okay.
Well, my thing that I'm confused with catnip is when my cat smells it, he acts like a lunatic. But when he eats it, I've read it's actually really good for digestion. So like when he's having a stomachache, I'll actually sprinkle a little bit in his food, and he doesn't act crazy at all when it's in his food. So I
Yeah.
like, what's the difference between like ingesting and having it go through your stomach, similar to like cannabis, eating it versus smoking it versus smelling it?
It's in how it's processed. For example, if you get a medication through the skin, through your skin, it's gonna have a slightly different mechanism of action as if you ingest it. In the same way that you can cut yourself up and you can use a little bit of alcohol to sterilize your wound, or you can drink it. Okay, so those are two different. I'm not advocating you drink rubbing alcohol.
No.
For the record,
Use
no.
it for hand sanitizer. That's what we do.
Yes, no, nothing like that.
So we have one last question about, do birds really get drunk on berries?
Absolutely. There's a lot of documentation that actually, it documents that. And not only one type of birds, multiple types of birds have been documented to get drunk on berries. And again, we don't know if they seek it out through the psychoactive effects or because they're hungry. And those are the only berries that they can find. But yes, I mean, that's a resound yes. Yeah, they can get, yeah.
And that's not all that birds can get drunk on. We've at Live Science, we've also written about I think it was seagulls getting drunk on flying ants, which produce a lot of formic acid, and the formic acid affects the bird's coordination and gets them a little loopy.
I haven't heard that one, but I don't dismiss it. Yeah, that's possible.
All right, so I have one last question for you. So we talked about the history and the evolution of intoxication, but what does the future hold for us? So what are the questions that scientists are currently asking about intoxication in humans and other animals, and how might they use new discoveries about intoxicating substances and how they affect us?
Thank you for asking me that, because even though I had a lot of fun writing the book and researching the book and geeking out and everything, one of my purposes on writing it is to help people understand what intoxication is and how we can combat it. Because I don't want to minimize at all. Because we tell about funny stories about intoxication, drunkenness, things like that, but in no way I'm making a mockery of drug addiction, intoxication, and everything bad that happens in society because of that. When we learn about how the nervous system interacts with intoxicating substances, it can help us minimize those effects. It can help us help people. Paradoxically, when we have a long-time addict, that person, sadly, is able to gauge the amount of drugs that he or she ingests, and it's less likely to die from overdose than a first-time user. Okay, and maybe if we learn how to help people like that, maybe we can give them a really good scare, and they will not touch anything bad for the rest of their lives. You know what I mean? That being said, there's a lot of mechanisms that animals, our animal cousins, can teach us about how we process, metabolize, and how we react to drugs, abused or otherwise.
Well, Oné, it has been such a pleasure geeking out with you about your book and about this topic. And so for all our viewers who want to indulge in more of the science of animal intoxication, Drunk Flies and Stoned Dolphins is available on Amazon and other online booksellers and at brick and mortar bookstores too. So
and thank you, and I'll be more than happy to get questions through email. I have a website, it's boldscientist.com. It's Bold Scientist for obvious reasons. There's my contact information. If you want to geek out with me, I'm there.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for watching Live Science. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.